Um, oh, okay, we're recording now. Great. So with the facilities, so you're gonna want to start with your zip code. And so I'm gonna pull up. This is the area I'm pulling up. It's an area outside of Houston. So Houston, the like petrochemical capital of America. So there's a lot of industry there. This is an area right outside of Houston. And so we can see it pulls up in a list, and it is really helpful. I'll walk you through kind of what's being displayed here. Here we have the facility name, and just on like a semantics level, facility, we're referring to a specific site. And when we say company, we're referring to the parent company. So here we can see there's nothing really crazy here, but you'll sometimes see companies that are named like by the way, LyondellBasell, one of the biggest petrochemical industries companies in the world, they own it's just called Houston Refining. So, just that name alone, you have no idea who owns it. But what Fenceline is really good at is just making that information like really clear. So it's really helpful for subsidiaries or just understanding like, is this random chemical company near me? Is it connected to some kind of chemical giant? Is it an actual kind of mom and pop shop? So. That's really easy. And we'll have obviously the address, which you might see. Sometimes these facilities have different addresses and different names. And so this is displaying how they've registered with the EPA. And these chemicals here, this is an overview of all of their chemical emissions just for what's called the toxics release inventory. And so the EPA classifies chemicals in a lot of ways. And they all have different requirements and different reporting rules and different, equipment requirements. And so the TRI, it is 21,000 facilities, which seems like a lot, but there's actually 6 million that are registered with the EPA. There's a lot of duplicates there, but just to give you an idea, Fenceline is driven by TRI. So only facilities that report to TRI are going to be in here. So usually like in when I'm reporting, I'll describe, TRI as like, it's some of the work, it's some of what the government considers are the most dangerous chemicals. And so this just like this huge amount of air, it doesn't air pollution, it doesn't show like something like fine particles, which like are commonly associated with like concrete batch plants. LyondellBasell also puts out a large amount of fine particles, but that number is not reflected here because that is not a part of the TRI. So that's just something to keep in mind. But a lot of the TRI chemicals, as we're going to see when we click into this, are, there's carcinogens or have really, really serious health effects. And so right now, because this is a platform that relies on EPA data, we are sometimes at the whim of what the EPA does with their data. So ECHO is the government's violation history. We'll look at what the profile is, but they changed something with their API, so we couldn't access it anymore and like display it here. But we'll show you how to do that here, and it kind of still just helps you skip a couple steps. And then you can change the years. Unfortunately now let's see. And then sometimes if you have a lot of facilities, it takes a really long time to load. But yeah, for right now, we're just having a little bug. This is a tool that's in development, but we're going to get it fixed. But this is also where you would get greenhouse gas data. So carbon monoxide, methane, and an important, just a reminder too, like this is driven by TRI. So if a facility reports to the greenhouse gas reporting program, but not TRI, they're not going to be in here. So I'm just going to click on this. This is LyondellBasell. This is a huge chemical plant. Again, one of the biggest chemical companies. And so it's going to take you to the profile that we have. I enjoy the map because you can kind of look around. You can see this is like right next to a residential area. And so that I don't know if that's a park. Like there's just, yeah, that looks like a park. So just right down the street. So those are like really important details, I think, when you're finding a facility is understanding who's around them and who is receiving that pollution. And so here we'll have the TRI, the specific chemicals. And this is my personal favorite part of Fenceline. I really enjoy the health hazards that it shows because something like methyl alcohol, I can't tell you off the top of my head like what that would do to you. But I have it all right here, and I do enjoy that. It takes from a bunch of different sources because, as I'm sure you might know, the US is sometimes, and the EPA is sometimes a little behind on what science they consider important enough to influence their regulation. So we have examples like from sometimes from the EU, like just from all over here, like California has kind of taken amongst themselves to produce kind of more stringent regulations. And so they have kind of adopted regulations that reflect the latest science. And so that's something that if you went to the EPA's page, you would not see. So you can look at all of those and then you can change the reporting year here. And I did want to go, I'm just going to go back to show you as well. You can look at the facilities, but you can also expand to the county. And this, because I chose Harris County, is going to take just a little while to load. But I think this is really helpful in the map view that I'll pull up is really helpful for identifying, the communities that are like, it's just a very clear visual of which communities are receiving, where these polluters are. So obviously here I'm very familiar with this area, so I understand like this is the Houston Ship Channel, famously where all the petrochemical refineries, where that industry has really been built out. And you can just see it really clearly how they're all clustered on the east side of Harris County, which also is where there's a lot of low income in communities of color. And so obviously I think environmental justice is just obviously something we want to keep reporting on and to emphasize because as you can see, there's a literal divide here. So that is the first way you can search. And then here, everything's going to take you back to the facility profile, but you can just search by a parent company and it'll show you all of their facilities, and their top pollutants, which is really helpful. And yeah, like I said before, there's sometimes companies or facilities that seem like disconnected, like this LNVA North Regional Treatment Plant. I would have no idea who that belongs to or what they do. But here I can tell that is an Exxon Mobil site. So there's that one. And then lastly, you can search by chemical. So this one will look up benzene, and we have, again, those health hazards. So if there's a particular chemical, like there's a new law or a new regulation related to a chemical, you can see really quickly how it would affect you and residents, and then who's releasing the most of it. So that is our rundown of Fenceline. We're going to go to Shelby now.
Real quick, there was a question of if companies are listed with different spellings, how do you ever know if you found all their facilities?
Yeah, I mean that is a problem. That is one of the inherent issues with it's how they report to the EPA. So I think that is a example of where you kind of have to do like you have to do a little bit of a deep dive, and I would just search. I would use different kinds of other than the name. I would look at the address. Do they have the same parent company? Do they have the same like emergency contact listed? Because they're supposed to have like an emergency contact listed. So in those situations where it comes up, I see very often between like EPA and state databases, et cetera. Like I would just you look at the name, but also look at the address and then search that address or that zip code, or you kind of unfortunately have to do that connection work yourself.
I'm putting in the chat a link that I use sometimes. It's the EPA's directory that you can search like variations of different names or like parts of names, and that's been helpful to connect some of those dots. We'll include a resource guide after this for some of those things exactly. So yeah, just really quickly, I'm Shelby Jouppi. I'm a data reporter with Public Health Watch. I've been working here for a little over a year covering the petrochemical industry in Texas and communities impacted by it. Before that, I'm from Michigan originally, lived in Detroit for a while, and so surrounded by industry. I was just kind of shocked by the footprint that the industry has, and the amount of people that are impacted by it every day, and the preferential treatment that they get with tax abatements and kind of some lax regulation. So that's what inspired me to want to do more reporting. And I found that these tools are really helpful. I do have a background in data analysis, but I probably could have used some of these before I learned those things. And so I'm excited to show you this next tool that we have that is a little bit more advanced, but still accessible. It's called the Toxic Industries Database. It was created by our partner in FencelineData called Material Research. They're a low profit research company that's really amazing. And so this tool that I'll be showing you has all of these data sources that you see here. We'll talk more about some of them specifically, but it allows you to queue like many years of the data, kind of control what columns you want to see, and it allows you to download it if you want to use it in a map or use it to like bring it into spreadsheets or something like that. And then you want to go to the next slide real quick? Some of the questions that you can answer with toxic industries is a little bit more detail of what kinds of chemicals are on site. You know, where exactly do they release in the water, air, and landfills? Do they manufacture the chemical or sell it? Who has the most of a chemical on site? Maybe they don't release it into the air, but they have a bunch stored because they use it for a certain process in their refining or something like that. And you can also look at accident history, which is a pretty illuminating thing to be able to access. And then you can look at some of their preparations for chemical accidents if they've identified weather, like hurricanes, as a risk, which along the Texas Gulf Coast and Louisiana coast, there are a lot of these facilities impacted by hurricanes. Um, we can start by, I will share my screen here and I will open this page. So this is toxic-industries.org. Again, we'll include it in our resource guide. Can everyone see it? Just making sure. Okay, cool. So this landing page has a webinar that they have put together, a tutorial that will go even more in depth than we'll go today. But I'm gonna just do an example with the toxic release inventory, which is the data that we've been talking about for fence line data. And as you can see, it goes back to 1987. So you've got a lot at your disposal here. You could queue it all up if you wanted, but it would take a very long time. So I'm just going to pull up 2024 data. And so here you'll see different 1A, 1B, 2A. These are forms that are related to the toxic release inventory. 1A is the most common one. That's all the release data that we were talking about. 1B is will tell you uh, what a facility does with the chemical. And there are some very sophisticated people who can track like which chemical goes from which facility to the next. And that's a little beyond me, but you can find those people. And that would be very helpful if you wanted to do some deeper diving. But so here I just select the form I'm interested in and I load the data. Um, what's really cool is that this is a large data set that you'd have to download. If you wanted to do more than 1 year, it's just going to get really out of hand and it's not going to be as fun to work with. So here, um, it pulls it up quickly. You can see that there are like more than 100 columns, which could be pretty overwhelming. But I don't have to look at all that if I don't want to. You could explore it. But here I can actually select the columns that I want to display, and it'll just show the ones I've selected. So I think that's a really great feature. So for this example, I'm going to talk about hydrogen fluoride. So there was a piece of legislation introduced earlier this year trying to ban the use of that chemical at refineries. There was a near miss chemical accident in Torrance, California, 10 years ago that almost released this low-hanging toxic cloud of hydrofluoric acid that would have traveled for miles and impacted hundreds of thousands of people. It's potentially lethal. It does just these terrible things to your body. And After that, this legislation has been introduced a couple of times. So I wanted to know, what are the refineries that manage this chemical? Where are they? How much do they have on site, to try to get a sense of who might be the biggest risks. So if I were to do that, I would probably come here and start by selecting the columns that I'm interested in. So I would like to know all of this information about the city, the county, the state, um, maybe even the zip code. I would scroll down here and look for the NAICS code. So this is really helpful. You can just narrow by industry. This will tell me I can filter by just petroleum refineries. I'll get the latitude and longitude, which there are sometimes issues with, so you really should check to make sure that that is exactly where the facility is. Sometimes it'll be like an office that is not on site that they'll have the latitude and longitude for. You can select parent company. Um, this is the EPA ID that typically they use across multiple EPA platforms, so that could be helpful for you. The chemical name. And then one of my favorite columns is maximum amount on site. So this again gives you an idea of like who are the biggest facilities, and a sense of scale. And lastly, I'll just choose air emissions, total air emissions. And so now I've got my columns, and it's showing me every single facility that reports to TRI. So I'm going to have to filter now. And I'm going to add two filters, one for primary NAICS code and one for chemical name. Um, okay, cool. And now I will filter for petroleum refineries and hydrogen fluoride. And here I can see that it has pulled all of these refineries, and all for the chemical hydrogen fluoride. And what's great is, instead of a huge data set, I now have 40 entries, and that's a lot easier to work with. I can do some sorting on the page, so I can automatically see who has the most on site. It's this Galveston Bay refinery in Galveston, Texas. And they didn't emit that much to the air. So another indicator that like using emissions is not a great way to tell how much a chemical is on site. So I can download this data as a CSV and upload it to a mapping platform. I could upload it to Google Sheets and just work with it any way I wanted to. And then lastly, I'm going to show you my next step that I did for a specific project. Was I looked at the risk management program data. So this is another really cool data source that was compiled by Data Liberation Project, and the facilities that manage large amounts of these chemicals have to report to the EPA every 5 years. What are their plans for trying to mitigate chemical accidents? Have they had like large chemical accidents? Um, what kinds of organizations do they coordinate with in the local area for emergency preparedness? It's a very rich data source. And so this platform allows you to search that data by chemical. So you can search whether a facility has reported using that chemical to RMP, or if they've had accidents related to that chemical. So for my cases, I'm interested in hydrogen fluoride, and I want to see if they've had any recent accidents of hydrogen fluoride. Oop. And I have to do contains because it's like a list that you have to search through. But yes, here we go. I've got all of these facilities that have mentioned hydrogen fluoride in their accidents. And what's really cool is that you can then click this link and get more information about their specific RMP plans from the Data Liberation Project. So you got their whole history of their risk management plans that you can explore. And then you also have a breakdown of all of their accidents, and you can see some of them have to deal with that chemical. You get information like the number of deaths that it caused, injuries, people that were evacuated or sheltered in place, and property damage. So it's a very great starting point with a lot of rich data.
Hmm. So thanks, Shelby. So yeah, but we're just I think, yeah, just there's so many, anytime you're working with data, you just need to remember like all the different caveats. So the big stuff with this, one, that these facilities are self-reporting these. These are them telling the government what they released. And like, with RMP, it's them, telling them what processes they're doing and how they're protecting. So just always keep that in mind. It's the best that we have, but there are, as I'm sure you can guess, just issues inherently with self-reporting. There have been instances where companies go back and they change their emissions. It's also based on, math and calculations. It's not coming from an air monitor. So just always keep that in mind when reporting on this. And then, yeah, if these sites are pulling from the EPA, so then there's challenges with EPA. Um, Again, having multiple IDs. There's like the Houston refining I was talking to you about. Like they have one ID registered with the EPA that they use to report to TRI. They have another that they use to report for greenhouse gas. So if you look it up and you're saying, oh, they don't have to report to greenhouse gas. Maybe just double check if you're doing a deep dive on this to make sure that you are actually capturing all of the data that you want to get. And then also just remember, like, there's a lot of loopholes for TRI or RMP. Like, there's just a lot of ways that exceptions. One of the chemical accidents that we reported was this huge fire at this, big facility. They had reported to TRI. It was a very well-known fire, and I had gone into their RMP to see, just to get information on that company, and I realized that that fire was not included in their accident history. And that's because that specific chemical process was not covered by RMP. So always just make sure that you just make sure that you get to like really dot all the I's, check all the T's, so that you can just make sure that you're getting the most accurate picture and communicating that to your readers. And so we wanted to give some ideas with stories that you can use this data. For a lot of this, I think anytime, like I would just say, like anytime a company does anything or anytime they're mentioned, I think it's just good hygiene to like check them out. I would just search them in FenceLine and just see, have they had any recent violations? What kind of emissions are they regularly releasing? What kind of harms would that be? And I would just personally, I feel like I just check it honestly anytime they do anything. So if they're at, city council meeting and they're, sponsoring a park or something, like I think that's just good information to kind of know and remind people of. And then some other quick ones. I mean, I think FenceLine in particular has some really good high level data points that, you could do as a quick story and localize for your geography or where you're focusing on. And so this example, this one's from Ana Bueno. She is a reporter with Univision in Houston. And so this was a permit hearing for a company. It was pretty contentious because they had a different location have a major explosion a few years earlier. And so I think this was the first permit hearing for a different location. And so I think one of the good things that she did, and she works in TV, which seems really, really hard to me, and like it's very fast paced, and you have to be able to deliver information really quickly. She had just gone and checked out FenceLine and was able to really tell in just a couple of seconds, just the emissions overview for the site, and then just a really quick version of what health hazards were being considered at the permit hearing. And so just being able to quickly communicate, this facility is releasing carcinogens, endocrine disruptors, asthmagens, like all that information was just, she was able to do it really quick and save her some time. And then if you wanted to take a step back, like you could do a kind of a company-wide track review and just see this was a facility owned by TPC. Just go and see, okay, this is the parent company. What other facilities do they have? What is their emissions limit? What's their, do they have any recent violations? Those are all just really quick kind of data points you can use to complement some breaking news.
This was the final product from that data that we queried in the demo I just did. I was able to merge some of the data together and upload it to Felt, which is a very cool interactive mapping platform. I think nonprofits can get a subscription for like $250 for the year. And it geocoded everything for me, which is cool, but it also you can like give it Latin long. And what I love about this is that it only took me like a day to put together. We put it out a couple days after the announcement of the legislation, and it just localizes an issue that it takes it from being this one freak accident that happened in this one city far away from you and shows that there are many communities across the country that could be impacted by one of these accidents. And then using the EPA data on how much a facility actually had on site, we're able to show a sense of scale on which facilities might be the biggest risk. We also combined this thing called worst case scenario data, which is really interesting. It's part of the RMP, but it's not available online. You actually have to make an appointment with the EPA to go to a local reading room to inspect them in person, and it gives you information like what the company has reported to the APA, the worst case thing that could happen with one of their chemicals. So, say a cloud of gas that could travel 20 miles in the span of 10 minutes and impact tens of thousands of people. It'll give you that information. So someone had already compiled that for hydrogen fluoride. I was able to use that, but you could do that by going in person. And I think it might take about a month to arrange, so it's not a good quick turn thing, but it's definitely a possibility. This example was using one of the chemical accidents that took place this past month at the paper mill in Washington. I was really quickly, in the course of a minute, able to find it in FencelineData just by searching the zip code of that facility. And seeing that does report to TRI. Actually, paper mills are surprisingly big polluters. I would not naturally think that they handle toxic chemicals, but you can see that they do handle quite a bit. And just by clicking the EPA Echo link right there on the right-hand side, it opened their profile. And at the top, I can see that they've had 16 informal enforcement actions in the past 5 years, which is actually quite a lot. They're like notices of violation or warnings. They don't really come with a fine, but they can kind of indicate whether a facility is having some problems. So for breaking news, I could just include that as a figure. I could try to get a hold of those by reaching out to the state or seeing if the state has them online, because those are typically handled by state regulatory agencies. And then you can also see that they've had some penalties and formal enforcement actions, which are more serious. So that would be one way that you could use it for breaking news. Another thing that you could do if you wanted to do a deep dive, which I'm sure many people are on this facility, is you could go to the risk management program data and pull their risk management plans. Have they had an accident related to this chemical in the past? You could show an expert their plan and ask like, hey, were they prepared for something like this? Did the plans that they have in place, were they sufficient? And do some accountability reporting. The U.S. Chemical Safety Board releases investigations and reports around these large accidents. So you can just kind of be ready to write about those when they come out, sometimes months or even a year later for bigger accidents. And this brings us to some deeper dives that you can do. Obviously, we've talked about quite a bit of them. But like these facilities are expanding all the time and asking to pollute more or renewing their permits, and so you can use that as an opportunity to dive into their track record. You can report on specific industries like the paper mill industry and what their environmental burden is. Are they responsible for more of a certain chemical than anyone else? And then their safety, how they contribute to greenhouse gas emissions, municipal solid waste, I learned, is not in TRI, but they are huge contributors of greenhouse gas emissions. So, and then you can look at where maybe an air monitor is placed in your community. If there are some polluters that are located far from that air monitor, and maybe you can write about that, or there's not even a single air monitor, you can write about that as well. And then solutions reporting, of course, we always forget this, but if you notice that a facility has had a huge decrease in pollution or an industry has, you can report on like why that is. So are they recycling a chemical? Have they figured out a new technology? Have they installed a scrubber or some kind of pollution control that really made a difference? And you can report on that.
Yeah, and then just some other ideas before we get into some examples. I think it's always important. This is honestly a personal wish for me. Just I would love for if we all. I'm trying to do this like more of the relationship and doing a story like with climate change and toxic chemicals because I find sometimes those can be really siloed, but they all impact. They're really connected, and so. Shelby's going to get into a really good example of, just combining multiple data sources and looking something holistically because, a community that's getting a lot of toxic chemicals is also probably by a polluter like that's really, releasing climate changing chemicals as well and, most likely in EJ communities. So just emphasizing, that and then all the other kind of burdens that those kind of communities may already face. Shelby's story is going to show you a little bit, emphasize like the different existing health effects that are in those communities. And so just making those ties as much as possible is, I think we should all try to do more. And then other things, I would just any kind of like outliers, both by location site and compared to their neighbors. If for some reason, this company is doing the same process as another one, but it's releasing a lot more emissions. That's why is that? Are they not using better equipment? Are they like, just finding out what exactly is happening there? And then obviously, identifying and reporting on the communities that are disproportionately affected by the pollution, and then also natural disaster preparedness, which we'll get into. And obviously, it's back to climate change with the, increasing intensity of natural disasters. It's more important than ever for these facilities to be prepared because oftentimes if there's a disaster and they lose power, probably in the like best case scenario as far as what's going to happen, once they lose power, they release huge amounts of emissions just when they're off. I think that's something always to keep in look at with your facilities. If there's like a hurricane or a tornado or something, did they lose power and how much was released? But also understanding like, that's probably like at least and most immediately the better case that what are they going to have a disaster, a fire, an explosion? So how are they prepared for all these weather events that are happening? And so with this story, this was an example of a company, a pretty, as you can see in the even just from Google Maps, you can tell how kind of nasty it is. They calcine petroleum coke. Petroleum coke is like a really dirty, dirty fuel. It's worse than coal. They are essentially purifying it to be used to make aluminum. And so what had happened is that this facility was releasing just crazy amounts of SO2. They were like a very notorious SO2 polluter, and we had gotten from a tip that they actually had updated their permit to add scrubbers, which are pollution control equipment. It kind of helps really it kind of eliminates some of the SO2 before it goes out into the air. So it's really great news. But I just went to check on this company in Fenceline and just saw also that it was a huge polluter because we usually focus just on the SO2 for this because there's such a bad SO2 polluter. But they also released 34,000 pounds of hydrochloric acid in 2024. And so once I noticed that, I was able to kind of see are the pollution controls going to affect that as well? And they actually did. So, which is really good for obviously the community. The story kind of explores some of the other caveats that kind of let them get away with some other stuff. But, that was just a way that Fenceline helped. And I thought that was also a good example with the chemical hazards where hydrochloric acid, the last time the EPA updated like their fact sheet was like in 2000 in January. That was their latest fact sheet on this particular chemical. And so Fenceline though has more of the robust science. So I was able to add, that this chemical has been studied and found to be, cause reproductive issues. So that was just really helpful. And then this with the natural disaster preparedness, this was a really good story by our colleague Elena, focusing on, this is Galveston, Galveston is an island outside of Houston that is, prone to get hurricanes. And so what she did is she was looking at all of the facilities there and are they prepared? And so I thought it was great where there's this was using RMP, which I think the story is actually, if you're interested in RMP at all, a natural disaster, I would read the story because I think she explains the history. It's one of those that has kind of ping-ponged between the Trump administrations and Biden and Obama as far as trying to update this rule, and then rolling it back, and then updating and fixing it, and then rolling it back. And so she kind of got into all of that. But then, obviously localizing it for the community that she was reporting, and then doing some accountability reporting and going to each individual facility and just seeing if they, do they say on their RMP that they're prepared for hurricanes? And a lot of them or not.
This this is an example of reporting on one of the many Trump administration rollbacks. So earlier last year, they had announced that they were going to reconsider uh, one of the rules that regulated the chemical manufacturing industry. They were supposed to, this updated rule from the Biden administration was supposed to help the industry cut, well, force the industry to cut like a huge percent of their carcinogenic emissions just through some changes to their technology and their monitoring. And so we wanted to take this, one of the many things that was happening at the time, and find a way to draw a picture of who would be impacted and also a picture of who these polluters are. So using one of the things that's not in this, it might actually be part of future versions of FencelineData, is CDC Places. You can access their dashboard online. It is like health estimates by like county, city, and census tract. And I was able to compare, okay, look at the census tracts around the facilities impacted by the legislation and figure out, perhaps no surprise, these were vulnerable communities that already were battling lots of health issues more than the state that they lived in. I compared it to the state rate. And I also looked at Echo. You can download Echo data from the website and work with it that way so that you can get a little bit more information, and found that when I compared the quote Han facilities to other major sources of pollution, they had higher rates of formal enforcement actions. They were more likely to be fined or have a high priority violation than their major source counterparts. And then I also used TRI data to kind of look at how much these facilities were responsible for those carcinogens that were in the rule. And it turned out that they were, responsible for like 60 or 70% of emissions of those chemicals. And that one of them, ethylene oxide, they've actually been increasing emissions over a few years. And a lot of that was responsible to just a handful of plants that would like accidentally release lots of the chemical. And then I know we're really close to the end of time, but this one was an investigation that Savanna, Jim, and I worked on at the end of last year. We didn't use the data a lot, but I think one thing that it was really helpful for was providing context for the petrochemical industry in Texas using TRI. We were able to write a couple of sentences that we wouldn't have been able to write. And I think this, I'll read the sentences here, but I think it's an example of how, when you work with this data, you're going to get a lot of random big raw numbers that like mean nothing to your audience unless they have some context. So like, are they in the top 10? Or, they're responsible for 60% of emissions, or some way that you need to help readers understand, like, what is the significance of this number? So we tried to do that with these sentences that were at the top of our story, with greenhouse gas data and toxics data. So Texas is responsible for more greenhouse gas emissions than Saudi Arabia or the global maritime industry. Its oil, gas, and petrochemical operations discharge tens of millions of pounds of toxic pollutants into the air each year, comprising almost one-fifth of such releases in the US. It is the nation's top emitter of the carcinogens benzene, ethylene oxide, and 1,3-butadiene. Um, Not the most eloquent sentences, but it gives you a little bit of a sense of the significance of this issue for this region. And oh, another tool that we use that we'll link to is Oil and Gas Watch. We relied heavily on them because they track all of the new permits and the expansions at a lot of TRI facilities, specifically in the oil and gas industry.
Yeah, so thanks guys for being patient and listening to us. As far as next steps, obviously that was a lot of information. And again, like this is, um, I think you have to be really specific with, what's your project because unless you're doing like a full facility profile. Oftentimes, you're not going to use all of these data sources at once. So I hope the ones that are most relevant to you and your work, you were able to get some helpful advice on that. We are going to send this recording, and we're going to send a resource guide with links to everything, including other data sources as well that can be combined with the data on the tools that we talked about or focused on. We would definitely love some feedback, both on this training and on the tools themselves, just because the tools are in development and we do want to do more trainings in the future. And then you can sign up. We have a newsletter that will include this link in the resource guide as well, and that's where we'll let you know about fixing, um, adding any new features and other opportunities. And if you have stories that use these tools or use this data at all, please send them to us. We will help promote them because we would just like to see more environmental data reporting out there. And then just let you know, like FencelineData, like some of the updates. Here's some of the ability, some of the things we're hoping to add this year or even after. So that's why your feedback is really important. We would like to know, like, what data sources would you like to see on there? What tools and features would be most helpful for you? I know, like, the census data will be super critical, especially in just seeing those connections that we, see with EJ communities. Yeah, so thanks everybody for joining us. I know it's the end of the day on a Wednesday, but yeah, if you have any questions, we can get to those now.
And you could either put those questions in the chat or ask them live. And then if anything comes up in the meantime, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'd be really happy to answer any questions that you have. Oh, someone has their hand raised.
Hey, thank you for such a great presentation. This was really helpful. Um, as somebody who's used the TRI um, database and been very confused, uh, I've also been thinking about, communities that are starting to monitor the air themselves. And I'm just curious if you've come across like any good data sets where that data is being made available to the larger public.
Yeah, that's a really good, yeah, that's a great point too. Because yeah, the communities, especially in the absence of action from the state, yeah, the purple air monitors are really popular. Other communities like I think it's just I love seeing everybody who it shouldn't have to be their job and it's not their job, but they are kind of taking action themselves and getting the data for themselves. And so I know that is a long-term goal, I think, for Fenceline is to make that community data accessible because, yeah, like we talked about the TRI, it is self-reported, but a company releasing 34,000 pounds of, XYZ chemical a year that doesn't tell you what is happening day to day and how, a neighbor is breathing that in. So I know that's a long-term goal for us. We're really hoping to partner with communities and make that accessible there. Other than the Purple Air monitor, like as far as right now, I know Purple Air, like you can contact theirs. I don't know, Shelby, if you know of any other sites that make, the community data accessible outside of maybe like the local organizations. Do you know any, Shelby?
I think I learned about one like earlier this year. So I will look that up and share that with the resource guide.
Thanks. Good question. Well, if there's any other questions in the future, yeah, definitely just email us. We're also hoping to do more, even like I'm fine with one-on trainings or like trainings to specific newsrooms. That could all, you know, be helpful because I know like this is a lot, and then we could kind of curate it to your specific needs and how you're hoping to use the data. So definitely feel free to email us, and then yeah, we're gonna send everybody the resource guide and the recording. But yeah, if there's let me see. Oh, cool. Oh, fun. Oh, Lean Community Air Monitoring Network. Okay, awesome. That's great. We'll also add that into that resource guide. Yeah, if you guys have any, things to share, we will be happy to add that to the guide. So, if there's no more questions, I think we can release you all for um, very, very nice. Wow, thank you. Thanks for the nice comments in the chat. We appreciate that as well. Yeah, you guys are free to be released, and yeah, let's stay in contact and definitely share your work with us. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.